Okay, good evening, everybody. We're going to speak tonight, Bezrat Hashem, about partners in crime, the Christians and the Muslims. I'm going to be basing this shir on a shir by Rav Moshe Shapiro Zeichat Tzaddik Livrocha, which was given in 5766 on Parsha's Balak, and I'm going to be using Rabbi Daniel Baron's notes, but I don't want anybody to think that in any way I'm giving over what Rav Moshe said. There's a famous story about a Talmud who came to the Pachad Yitzhak, Rav Yitzhak Hutner, and said, "Rebbe, do you mind if I give over your Torah in my name?" He says, "I don't mind that at all. Just make sure that you don't give over my Torah, your Torah in my name." So this is not, it's what I managed to glean, and I very much recommend that if you should go and listen to the shir listen to Rav Moshe, because, and what I'm going to try and do is just give you a very, 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 very limited hint of what it was that he was dealing with, and in my own way, I have to, obviously, the inaccuracies and things that I accept for myself. I apologize for those in advance, but to the best of my ability, I'd like to try and say over an idea that I heard from my Rabbi. We've spoken many times before about the idea of the four exiles. There's a concept that there are four historical world exiles: Babylon, Parsha, Modai, Persia and Media, Yovan, Greece, and Rome. And the Jewish people have been, so to speak, exiled, have traveled through those four great exiles, and eventually we will come to the end of that fourth exile, the Siman, the Semel, the symbol of the fourth exile, which is the exile of Rome. And of course, as we said before, by Rome we can extrapolate that to when Rome became a Christian empire, it became the Holy Roman Empire, which was neither Holy Roman nor an empire, which eventually became the what we would call in the West the Catholic Church, and Church in the Eastern Church in the East. And I think one can extrapolate from that basically the Weltanschauung of the modern Western materialistic world. That is really, I would say, where Edom, who is Esav, who is Rome, they're all the same. We see in today's world. And these four exiles are hinted, the Semel, the symbol of Edom, of Rome, is the pig. In Hebrew, that's the Chazir. The Chazir sticks out its trotters and says, "Look, I've got cloven hooves, I'm kosher, I'm fine." And in point of fact, the greatest threat to Jewish survival has been through assimilation, unfortunately, more than Holocaust. There's going on in America now a silent Holocaust, which has claimed many, many, many more Jewish neshamas than Ymach Shemo managed to do in Europe, although, of course, that was much more obvious and much more brutal. But there's a silent, asphyxiating embrace of the Western world, which Jews have to recognize. We're living in that world, but let's not fool ourselves. We're in an exile, a very comfortable exile. The Golden Medina, they called America, the Golden State. And we're in a golden fur-line exile. But exile it is just as much, and in some ways is more insidious by virtue of the fact that it's so comfortable. Nothing is more terrifying in a way than a comfortable prison. And the pig, the Chazir, also, Chazal tell us, I'm not sure it's the Chazal, could be it's the Arizal, that the word, the Chazir is also from the Lashon in Hebrew of lachzir, to return. Why? Because eventually they will return the Malchus to Klal Yisrael. The concept is that each one of these nations, Bavel, wrested the throne, the kingship of David from Klal Yisrael, and they in turn were snatched from them by the Persians, the Medians. The Greeks in turn took it from them, the Romans from them, and eventually Rome now is the last stop on that journey, and they will be machzir. They will return the crown, the keta. They will to Klal Yisrael with the coming of Mashiach ben David, David HaMelech. B'ezrat Hashem, Korov B'Yameinu. And that pasuk is hinted to in the very beginning of the Torah. V'haaretz hayu so b'vo v'choshech al pnei sahom. So describes is Bavel, and the Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer brings a pasuk to back that up. Vohu is Toe is right. Toe is Bavel. No, one second. Toe is Babylon. Vohu is Parsha Madai. The Hevilu Havias as Haman. Choshech is the Greek exile that they were hechishu. They darkened the eyes of the Jewish people because they were some with their gezeras. Al Panei Sahom, on the first face of the deep, that refers to Rome because that last exile of Rome seems to go on or as deep as the deep is, almost fathomless in its extent. Now, that's what we've spoken about in previous weeks, but there's also another dream of exile, a dream that Daniel had in the book of Daniel. And he sees, and we'll come to this, and in that dream, he dreams of the crown on the top of the head is Mitzrayim. Of course, we should have said that Mitzrayim is the fount of all of the exiles. Mitzrayim, Egypt, is the prototypical, that is the exile, and of course, everything, Maisa Ovis Simon Labonim, the actions of the fathers is a guide to the children to come. And Egypt summarizes and sums up all of the latter exiles. So Mitzrayim is the beginning of everything. So Mitzrayim is the head on it. Daniel has this vision of a man, the statue of a man. Really, we can call him the anti-man, the anti-tzurat ha'adam. Mitzrayim is the crown, Bovel is the head, Parsha Madai is the shoulders, and Greece is the trunk. And the two legs, he says, one is Edom and the other one is Ishmael. So this is a slightly different idea than the four exiles. Really, the idea of the four exiles is because each one of those exiles snatches and wrests the crown from the one before it. Ishmael, the Arabs, have their own kingdom of rights. They got it from Avram Avinu. It's not that they snatched it from us, which in a sense is why they have an independent power. Because they do have some kind of right. Some kind of rights. But it's them together in that line, of course, going down historically, down the Tzura Sa'ad in the body of the man. We started with Mitzrayim, we work all our way down, and we are now in the legs of exile. And those two powers work together in tandem. And this is really the forces that we're confronting in our day. Now, Bilam was very clever. All of the curses that he wanted to give Klal Yisrael, Hashem turned them into brachot. But the Gemara says in Sanhedrin, Amar Rabbi Abba, Rav Kahana, Kulam, all of those blessings that Hashem gave, Chazru leklala, they returned to curses. Chutzmi bate knesios u bate midrashos, except for the blessing that rests on houses of prayer and houses of study, as it says, Vayafoch Hashem Elokecha locha esa klala labrocha. Ki ahavta, ki ahevacha Hashem Elokecha, says the Gemara, klala velo klalot. That was the rest of those we're still living in. All of the so-called brachas that Bilam gave us, they returned, they went back to being klalos except for that one. And the reason is because when we are at Tzibur, a Beit Medrash, a Beit Knesset represents Klal Yisrael as a unit, as a group, as a community. We're always loved by Hashem. Even when as individuals we're very low, Hashem never despises a Tzibur. Hashem is never nimas, the tefillah of a tzibur. Even though we're on a very, very low level, together as Klal Yisrael, we always can plug in to that bracha, which stays a bracha to this very day. Now, if you remember, after, and that's going to be he failed, so to speak, after Bilam failed to be able to machshil, to bring klalas against Klal Israel, he came to Balak with an eitzah, a piece of advice. He said, their God hates Zima, who sone Zima, he hates immorality. And therefore, they concocted this plan where the Benot Moab, the daughters of Moab, would go out and seduce the Jewish men. And as a result of that, we know there was a tremendous plague. A lot of people died. And it's an interesting fact about this temptation, this, how do you say, more than temptation, this successful plot, so to speak, of Bilam and Balak to trip the Jewish people up by luring them into znus, because as Bilam says, their God hates zima, he hates znus, he hates immorality. And Balak had followed his wife, followed Bilam's advice. Yet we see that the Benos Moab, before they would acquiesce to the Jewish men that they could be with them, they insisted that they worshipped the idol of Baal Peor. What is the combination here between Avodah Zarah, worshipping Avodah Zarah, and immorality? Seems to be that they go hand in hand in some way. Why the Avodah Zarah? So, first of all, maybe I should just mention incidentally something that I heard in the name of Chaim Shmulevitz. The way that Baal Peor was worshipped was extremely bizarre. The idea was that the worship of Baal Peor consisted of defecating in front of the idol. And they would eat, I think it was lentils or some kind of food which provoked their digestive systems to a spectacular release of, and that was considered to be the best way you could worship Peor. Very, very strange, very bizarre. So Reb Chaim Shmulevitz once understood this as follows: that the idea of Peor is, like, let it all hang out. Nothing matters. The human body is beautiful. Every human process is beautiful. It's all beautiful. That's the Avodah Zarah that we see even in our day and age. There's nothing wrong. It's all there. There are no boundaries. The most beautiful, bestial, if you like, the most basic, the most lowly human function is something that it's fine. We can. And once you let that go, you say that everything is fine, then hey, you can all do all kinds of immoral things. When you remove the boundary of what's considered to be appropriate, what's inappropriate, what is foul and what is fair, what is beautiful and what is ugly, and you say, hey, it's all beautiful, it's all... So that was, I'm going off on a tangent here, Reb Chaim Shmulevitz's understanding of what was the secret, so to speak, of how to lure them into immorality. Because remember, we're talking about the door of the Midbar. These were people, Jews, on a very, very high level, so it needs understanding as to exactly how they were able to do this. But that was his understanding, that you make everything is fine, it's all natural. Hey, what's to be embarrassed about? Nothing to be embarrassed about. Back to our main point here, that the idea of what is the connection between zima, immorality, sexual immorality, and avodah zarah, idol worship. Now, Menachem Mendel Mishklov, who was a Talmud of the Rebbe, was Talmud of the Gra, heard directly from the Gra that there's a tradition going back to the Gaonim, which goes back to Moshe Rabbeinu, that all avodah zarah is accompanied with promiscuity. And that's why you see very often the biblical verbs used in connection with avodah zarah are consistently those of adultery. You see, when we talk about the Jewish people, were mazana achrei avodah zarah. So it has to be understood, what is this connection between idol worship and immorality? The nations of the world after the Mabul, after the flood, separated themselves from Zima. That was one of the things that they put behind them, so to speak. But the avodah zarah that developed chipped away at that commitment to sexual propriety. And then, of course, everything fell afterwards. the Arizal and the Grol, that Moav is Gematria 49, Memtes, since Moav embodies all the possible loneliness, the Memtes Share Tuma. It's a concept I think we mentioned before. 49 is the maximum anything can be in this world. 7 is the days of the week, the colors of the rainbow, the scales of the diatonic scale. This world is basically 7. If you want to extrapolate to the maximum 7 can be, it becomes 49. The maximum anything can really be in this world is 49. That's why the 49 steps that we count up to Shavuos, we don't count the 50th day, because Shavuos is really a day that represents something beyond this world. So 49, the Benos Moav. Moav is Gematria 49. They were the lowest, quite literally, of the low. As we explained before, that Daniel had a prophecy. As we said before, the Keter, the crown, was Mitzrayim, which was the root of all the exiles. Bovel was the head of gold. Porus and Modai are the arms. Yovan is the torso, the body. And Edom and Ishmael are the 2 legs that Daniel saw in this vision. Now there's something very essential about the legs. They have to work in tandem. Rahman al-Islam, if a person only has one arm, he has one arm. If a person only has one leg, it's as though he has no legs. And of course, unless he has a prosthetic or he has a stick, but basically one leg, the legs require one another. Legs don't work unless there are 2 of them. And this symbiotic relationship between the exile of Ishmael, the exile of Edom, is a symbiotic relationship. Meaning that in some way, Zima, and we'll come to that in a second. Okay, so let's talk first of all about the Christians. There's a mitzvah in Sefer Bamidbar, v'hoyo lechem letzitzis urisa moiseu zechaltem es kol mitzvos Hashem v'asisem osom v'lo sosuru achrei levavachem v'achrei einechem. So the Gemara says, what does it mean, achrei levavachem? Zu minus. Minus means apostasy, denial. V'chein hu omer, amal nava beliba ein elokim. The disgusting one says in his heart, there is no God, chalila. And achrei einehim, what's that after your eyes? That's hirhur aveira. Aveira, when it's not undefined, aveira always means sexual aveira, immorality. Rashi says, what is minus? Very interesting. Of course, remember, Rashi is writing this under the careful, watchful eye of the censor. He says, minus osam hahofchim tame haTorah lemedrash ta'ut ve'elil. Those who turn the exegesis of the Torah, the Tameh HaTorah, the reasons of the Torah, lemedrash ta'ut, take that back. The reasons of the Torah, lemedrash ta'ut, to mistaken exegesis, wrong understandings, ve'elil. Now, elil is a very interesting word. In Hebrew, when you want to make something smaller, the diminutive, you double the last syllable. For example, the hottest time of the year, we're coming up to that, is Av. Av. If you double the last syllable, Av, you get Aviv. Aviv. Aviv in Hebrew means spring, because spring is like a small Av. So the diminutive can be achieved by doubling the last syllable. I'll give you another example. Eitz is a tree. Atzitz, double the last syllable, is a sapling. If you take look at the word alil now. Alil is basically the word kale, which means God. They made him into a small God. They made him into a man. This is Rashi, so to speak, speaking in such a way that the censor wouldn't understand what he was talking about. So the great denial of Christianity, that is their avodah zarah. That is their turning away from the Torah, taking God and making him into an elil, a small God, a man. So, minus Avodah Zarah, that is the leg of Edom, of the Christians, and of the modern Western world. We live in a world where it's accepted that a person should be an atheist unless he can prove to the contrary. On the other hand, the other leg is the leg of Yishmael, and Yishmael is connected with Znus. The Gemara says that Asara Kavim Shel Znus Yordu La'olam. 10 kavim is a dry weight. 10 kavim of Znus came down to the world. The Yishmael lokach tisha. Of those 10, Yishmael took 9. Znus became so central to that nation that the way they categorize their Olam Haba is Znus. That is how they see the world to come. That is if I'm not making myself clear, if you have a look in the Quran, you'll see that the promise for every believing Muslim man, I don't know about the women, but the men have all of this, basically, it's a sexual smorgasbord, a feast of whatever you want. That's their Olam Haba. It's the ultimate destiny of Yishmael's ideology. So, Lo sasur acharei levavechem acharei einechem. That enjoins us to avoid the influence of these two nations, and these are two forces that operate together. They are the legs. Let's understand, what does it mean that they're the legs? And therefore, just to put it back into the context of the Parsha of Balak, Moab's attack on the Jewish people had to include both of these elements. The Avodah Zarah of Baal Peor, and after that, and together with that, the Znus, the immorality of the Bonos Moab, the daughters of Moab. Legs, as we say, work in tandem. Legs are, in a sense, the future of a person. In a sense, quite practically speaking, the legs take a person to where he wants to go. Where does he want to go? We've said in many times before that the word in Hebrew, eretz, can be read as arutz, I will run. This world is a world of running, of ritzui, of desire. The legs express the future, where a person wants to get to, where a person could get to. The legs express the future. The power to move, to bring yourself to a place beyond. It says that Kadosh Baruch Hu showed Moshe all of the land before he died until the Yam Ha'acharon. Literally, Yam Ha'acharon means the final, the last sea, the last or the far sea. Chazal say it's a reference to Yom Ha'acharon, the last day. In other words, Hashem showed Moshe the entire future, but of course it was a future that Moshe never could realize on a personal level. His legs couldn't take him there. But his progeny, his descendants, Klal Yisrael, would. Man was created to travel. The father of Klal Yisrael, Avram Avinu, is enjoined by Hashem to lech lecha, go. The whole process of spirituality is to move, is to travel. Lech lecha means go for yourself, but literally it means go to yourself. And in point of fact, they're identical words. You spell them the same way. Lamed and Chaf Sofit. Lech lecha. The lecha, your lecha, is basically the sum of where you're going to be able to lech. You become the place that you get to. And you're enjoined to grow, to reach places beyond where Hashem placed you, to accomplish, to become bigger, to become holier, to become more connected. This is the job of a person. This is why he's put in this world. Leave your birthplace. Leave Or Kasdim. Go beyond. So again, man's legs contain this dimension of the future. Unfortunately, nowadays we mostly use our legs to gratify our desires, to go on holidays and to travel and to. But basically, the legs are the purpose of man's locomotion is for him to run to do a mitzvah. Now, in Chazal we find that the three lower midot, yeah, L'cha Hashem hagedula, ga'avura, v'tiferes, v'hanetzach, v'hod, and one which is called Ki Kol Bashamayim Va'aretz, which is called Yesod. They are the lower three of the Esespheros, of the Midos. Netzach and Hod are classically the two legs, and they form a triad. If you look at the picture of them, Netzach v'Hod, and in the center is Yesod. They are the legs, and Yesod represents the power to reproduce. That is the ultimate future of a person, of a man. Well, that place in the place of a human being is the power, is the place of his future. Which is why the bris, the Groa says, why was the bris milah placed in the part of the body, that part of the body? And the answer is that the bris between Avram Avinu, between Hashem and Avram Avinu, was that Hashem, so to speak, Avram, so to speak, said to Hashem, I'm going to give you my future. Everything that I will ever be, Avram said, all my progeny will be to serve you, to bring your awareness to the world. And the bris was reciprocated by Hashem to say everything that I, Kavah Yochel, will ever be, everything Hashem will ever be in this world will be through the Jewish people. Hashem's future, so to speak, in the world was committed to the Jewish people through that bris, and Avram Avinu committed his future to Hashem, and that is why the bris, that mark of the covenant, was placed on the place of the future. Interesting enough, also in the female anatomy, the rechem, the womb, the letters rechem can be rearranged to spell machar, which means tomorrow. Again, the future. That is what the legs represent, and that is what Yesod, that is what the organ of reproduction represents, the new future. The Gemara calls a son, the kara da'avua, the leg of the father. Moshe Rabbeinu was able to reach that Yom Acharon, to see that Yom Acharon through the perpetuity of his offspring. The legs are how a person brings his personal future in what he's able to do in this world, and Yesod, his organ of reproduction, brings him further than where he personally can reach through his offspring. Avodah Zarah is really another manifestation of Znus. Idol worship is a kind of a manifestation of immorality. Let's try and understand this. The Yetzer Hara, on a superficial level, one would think, seeks ephemeral pleasures, but on a deeper level, the Yetzer Hara really is much more sophisticated. He wants more than that. What the Yetzer Hara really wants to do is to uproot a person from the Tzura Sa'odom, the picture of the man that Hashem intended for him, and that anti-man that Daniel saw in his vision represents. That's what the Yetzer Hara wants from us. Now I want to try and bring across a point which really, it's a bit difficult to talk about, but we'll do our best. If you look closely at the Yetzer Hara for Znus, you'll see that it really reveals what the Yetzer Hara is really all about. There are people who take a lot of pleasure in eating, going around the best restaurants in the world, but the quest that a person has for immorality is so much more powerful than that. The desire for food, for physical comfort, is never as powerful as this desire for sexual immorality. In fact, the Gemara says that a person can become so consumed with Znus that in extreme cases, the only way he can save himself from that is separation from life itself. In the case of Rabbi Elazar ben Dordaya, famous Gemara over there. And now this is really what I wanted to get to. The deeper motivation in the Yetzer Hara apart from the mere pleasure, the pleasure of arayot, of sexual immorality, is the desire to consume one's tomorrow today. Let me explain what I mean. The pleasure goes further than just the act itself, which really, on one sense, is no deeper than any other pleasure. But although, as I say, it's difficult to discuss this, znus is unique. There is no other physical pleasure that is so intense and then all at once, when obtained, is so instantly irrelevant and even loathsome. It's as though a person just consumed something and he doesn't have a full stomach. He doesn't have a feeling of physical gratification. He's left with something very empty. Unless, of course, it's something which is an expression of love. But the act itself, and actually I'll go back on that, znus itself, not physical love in the proper context. The znus of a person is that he instantly feels almost repelled by what he's just done, even though that was the most desirable thing in the world for him 2 seconds ago. And this is really what the Yetzer Hara has done, is to be able to fob him off with his future today. Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto explains in Mesilas Yesharim that Hashem created man to receive pleasure and to be nene in the ziv of the Shechina, ultimately. That's in the future. The place of that pleasure is the world to come. We have no access to that pleasure other than the merest divine whisper of the experience of Shabbos. Shabbos is one of the things which is echad mishishim, is the threshold of perception, the taste of Olam Haba, the world to come. Man does not want to realize his future in the future. He doesn't want to wait for the future. He wants instant gratification. He wants his future now. The Yetzer Hara causes one to imagine that he's created for the state that he's in now. That's it. Go for it. Just do it. There's no future. There's no afterlife. That's the greatest denial that they can be. Go for it now. It entices a person to eat his future now, to live for the here and now. And the Yetzer Hara infuses that idea drop by drop into a man's consciousness until the Yetzer Hara destroys the person and convinces him to devour his future now. The Gemara says that one of the other things which is Me'el Olam Haba is also physical relations. But when used in the wrong way, it's not a taste of the world to come. It is consuming the world to come right now. You are eating your future now. And that's why it leaves a person with this tremendous sense of emptiness, because he senses that he's just consumed a part of his Olam Haba. As we said, Yishmael, his descendants who took the 9 Shishatavim of Znus, made that pleasure into their entire world to come. That's in their entire future. So, we mentioned this before. There was a time which we can't understand anymore because Chazal removed this compelling lust for Avodah Zarah from the world. They sought to remove the power of Znus from the world and Avodah Zarah from the world, and they took it out. And then what happened was, after 3 days, no chicken had laid an egg. So the power of the desire for sexual relations was replaced in the world in an attenuated form. But the power of the attenuated form was that after that, people no longer had attraction to their own families, naturally anyway. Their own families. That was taken away. But what was completely removed was the desire for idol worship. It's very difficult for us to. We mentioned this before. The idea of bowing down to these sort of extra large dollies is something which is very difficult for us to relate to. And yet, if you'd lived in that generation, there's a famous Gemara where Rav Ashi, Menashe tells Rav Ashi that had he lived in his time, Rav Ashi would have abandoned all social norms, hitched up his skirts to run after Avodah Zarah. And the only way we can imagine that is that if you think of the incredible power that you see in TV advertising for using, ladies who don't have enough clothes on it, so that would be the same power to worship, run off and worship an idol. And in those days, had there been TV advertising, they wouldn't have had, young ladies in sports cars. They would have had these big dollies in sports cars. And really, wow, it's impossible for us to imagine how compelling worshipping an idol was. But it was exactly the same irrational power. My Rabbi once said many years ago that you see how irrational the desire for znus is. A person has a desire, a man has a desire to look at ladies. Do you really think you're going to see something you didn't see before? You think about it. You're going to see something that you've never seen before. Where is the chiddush? It's clearly something which is not logical. You've seen it all before. You've seen many, right? But no. I've got to see that. It's so compelling and so illogical. This is what we're talking about. It's a yetzer hara. It's something that tries to take a person and use up his olam haba, that pleasure that's reserved in olam haba, and eat it now. Because the subliminal message of the world that we live in is there's nothing after you die. Go for it. Eat it up. The world, we long for the day that Hashem will return and he'll be Melech, Kol Olam. To get to any real future, we need to leave ourselves, to escape ourselves through the legs that operate properly to bring out to our destiny, to aspire to this future in our own lives and through our offspring, through giving the correct education and chinuch, to transcend. And the Yetzer Hara's entire message is no, eat it today, consume today. And this is the way a person consumes his future. So as we said, Edom and Yishmael are living in an imagined future. Lo sasur achrei levavechem achrei einechem. Achrei levavechem minus avodah zarah, einechem snus. The Christians and the Muslims, whose religions represent a denial, a desire to consume on the part of the Christians the idea that their God has already arrived, their future is already here, and the znus of Islam, where their entire concept of the world to come is immorality. As we said before, Hashem, all the brachas that Hashem turned into, all the klalas that Hashem turned into, in Bilam's mouth into brachas, returned to klalas, except the one thing which is to be part of Bati Knesios and Beti Midrashos. That's the only place that you will find a bracha nowadays. The only place you find a bracha is when you're sitting in the Beis Medrash, is when you're davening. That is the place which was rescued, where the klala, the curse of Bilam, doesn't extend. It's worthwhile to fear those curses of Bilam. Hashem hates zima. He hates immorality. The Yetzer Hara for a raya is alive and well. You don't have to be, all you need to do is walk down the street and you have to keep your eyes very, very guarded. In our smallness, we can't feel the Yetzer Hara for Avodah Zarah so much anymore. And the reason is because we are below it. That desire, our general sensitivity is so dulled that we don't really understand it, or it's an antithesis. But it's the same thing. The Yetzer Hara, which is predicated on consuming the future, Our job as Jews is to orient ourselves to the future that is HaKadosh Baruch Hu promised to us. The legs of exile are the legs of Yishmael, which marches to a place which is indeed futureless, meaning Zima, and Edom, as I said before, who already believes that the future has arrived. We long for the real future every day. Kadosh Baruch Hu should help that though we live under, through, breathing in the secular world, the klalos of Bilam, that the schus of the Beti Medrashos, the Beti Tfilah, and essentially what they represent, which is the actus of Klal Yisrael, Jewish people as a nation, even in spite of our individual loneliness, eventually that we will see the true coming of our real future with the coming of Mashiach Tzidkenu, b'mheira of Yomeinu.
So, first, a couple of things. One, the fact that people have a harder time believing in Hashem nowadays, like that seems to be the main difficulty for a lot of Jews. Is that maybe a consequence of when Chazal sort of lowered that little lever? Fine, it made idol worship less, but maybe it also decreased our sensitivity to Hashem at the same time, in the same way that when they initially decreased like desire, they decreased towards family members as well as towards.
It says in, I think it's Eov or Mishlei, I forgot now. Etzeh le'umaseh os Elokim. Hashem made everything equal and opposite. And for sure, to the extent that there's less avodah zarah in the world, there's less attraction, therefore it becomes that there's also less power, and we have to supply maybe more of the power in order to connect to Hashem. I think that's true.
Wow. And the other thing is
the prophecy. We learned that when avodah zarah's desire was removed from the world, prophecy came by the hand. That we learned that.
Prophecy.
That in the very moment that the desire for avodah zarah was taken from the world, prophecy
goes.
No longer was available.
And this is actually at the same time as the great flourishing of the Torah Shel Baal Peh. Ad kan, it says in Gemara, Ad kan Nevi'im Nisnabu, the prophets prophesied, Mikan Hat Einecho, incline your ear, and something like Shema Divrei Torah. This is when the Torah, the great, how do you say, ribui, the great explosion, so to speak, of Torah Shabbat Peh takes place.
And then the other thing is that, okay, so the negative side for the two legs are something like avodah zarah, but also immorality.
Those are the two legs.
What were the positive side for the two legs? There must be like a flip side to them that is good, that helps us in our journey towards,
Well, the idea is that those two legs in their separate ways, represented by Ishmael and Edom, take a person to consume his future now, to a denial or an eating up of his olam haba, according to the Arabs, which is the Zima, or according to the Christians, that the future is already here now. A denial of what we're supposed to be here for, which is to work towards an olam haba. That's what the Mesilas Yesharim says. A Jew's in this is a corridor. This is a prose door for the palace of light that's to come. So it's basically their messages that that's it, you're here. Go for it.
But is there an inversion of the two forces that the legs are divided into the positive forward of momentum that takes you towards Hashem?
I think
similar division?
I'd have to think about that.
Okay.
Okay.